Well, we have the dubious honor to have the last talk before lunch. And as anyone that's been in that position before, we want to make this well worth every minute of your time. Now, you've heard a lot of experience in the room today. We had a symposium with ICA just down the block yesterday as well to talk about all the mechanics and what we call the pillars of what's required to make a really stable and functioning regulatory market work the first time. And what we're going to do is we're going to distill a lot of that information for you. Now, 30 years ago, I started as a federal prosecutor in drugs, in marijuana, oddly enough. Much younger man, a lot less gray hair. But I can tell you one thing. When I looked at who we were prosecuting for cannabis, marijuana, 30 years ago, and I also looked at the other people we were prosecuting for opioids, it was not the same individual. And needless to say, my days at the prosecutor's office were numbered. So for 30 years, I've been working through my career looking for ways to find a way to bring cannabis internationally and globally. Our head office is here in Panama. For those of you that are coming on the COE tour tonight, the buses will be outside the hotel. I'm sorry, but we could only accommodate 125 people this round. If you're not able to come tonight, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to do personal tours and show you what we do. And what we do is provide a full turnkey solution working from government down to final patient consumption and their feedback and how well that experience transpired. But this topic is about the legislation itself. If this is not put together properly, I have to tell you, in the jurisdictions that we work in, it's virtually impossible to fix bad regulations. And bad regulations will impede investment. Bad regulations will make sure the black market thrives in ways it never thought it could. Bad regulations will ensure that the people who want the product can't get it when they want it in the price that they need it. All right, back up. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is, even though Panama is late to the party, and there's a talk this afternoon about Panama 2020, what does that mean for the economy? What does it mean for the regulatory body of Panama to bring cannabis into this market as well as into other emerging markets in Central and Latin America? But just because you're late doesn't often mean a bad thing, because you have the benefit of learning all the mistakes of the other jurisdictions. And what we've done is worked to compile all of that into a common list. The problem looks like this. When we work with international parties, international governments, the common theme is they think that they're doing this for the first time, that somehow they were the first one to invent the wheel. Sadly, some don't invent circular wheels. They're more square or oblong, and the wheels fall off the bus once the regulatory framework gets up to speed. But what we want to be able to do is identify with them what happens when those systems fail. And when they do fail, it's either due to improper planning, design, implementation, or in many cases, just in how they're going to even have enough staff to be able to police themselves. The result, of course, is obvious: harm to patients and the end users. What we've seen in multiple jurisdictions, Panama may be somewhat immune in the way the legal civil framework is set up here, but in most jurisdictions we've been in, the legislation is driven by lawsuit. And it's from the end users, the producers, the processors, the distributors that end up suing their own government because they're ineffective in rolling out a proper set of regulatory frameworks. What you can do in agriculture, you can't do in cannabis. What you do in manufacturing, you can't do in cannabis. What you do in healthcare, you can't do in cannabis, even though essentially it's the same process or product. Because of that, we see escalating costs of the program management and monitoring. The government is spending way too much time reacting to complaints as opposed to getting in front of these issues. And the worst of all worst is law enforcement loses all confidence in the government and ever hoping to regulate this properly. And we've gone through that in multiple jurisdictions. I'd be happy to share the anecdotals, but it really is sad when it gets that far, to the point that they lose all respect from the taxpayers. Now, you're not alone. We have over 60 countries in the world. This is just a small spattering, just of countries. If we even include individual states, which all run like little mini countries in the United States, and we add indigenous communities on top of that, if we were to total it all, as I have, you're well over 110 jurisdictions have tried going down the road and pulling together regulations. Are they consistent? Not at all. Are they complete? Never. Are they ever quite right out of the box? Absolutely not. And so what we've been doing and working with governments around the world is say there is, in fact, a better way, and that's what Mimi will, of course, be addressing with you. Now, sorry. The biggest two issues that any regulatory body has to manage is both diversion and quality. Diversion is endemic. Even in systems that are regulated, if we can use Canada, as you've heard much about today, it does allow both for recreational and for medical. There was a very good case in point last week where a licensed producer was in fact caught taking black market cannabis, putting a white market label on it and sending it out the door. That is a problem because whenever these regulatory systems are too slow to adopt, you actually build a demand that's far ahead of the supply. And the only play you can to make that demand fit is you go to the black market to fill a supply. So in managing diversion, you have to really address in the legislation how you're going to deal with criminality and what does that mean with regards to license. The other issue we have, of course, is underage. There are a few papers that will suggest that providing cannabis to people that are of younger years as teenagers may result in issues, but the legislation worldwide is very inconsistent on this point. The ages are not standardized in how you would be able to prescribe for a child with epilepsy, for example. In some countries it's illegal, and of course quite legal in others. Black market status quo. I have to say, living in Canada and watching that market evolve, we have a larger black market in Canada than we did before legislation, before I prosecuted. And that's only because we've got the numbers that count in the terms of 800,000 Canadians now wanting the product, whereas back when I prosecuted it was something less than 220,000. Then of course we have the risk of getting all of that combined to a system that's completely dysfunctional to the point that no one obeys the rules. And we are in jurisdictions, some in Latin America, where they've given up. You just do what you want when you want and we'll let it go from there. Now on managing the quality side, the biggest two issues are obviously contamination in dealing with biological and chemical risk contamination. There's been good talk and debate on how do we adopt technologies. Are we going to be growing in the field outdoors? Are we going to be growing indoors? If we do either, what does that mean? Are we going to be making something that's more like wine in the sense that we celebrate variation, a good batch from 2017, April, that's the one I want to buy, or is it going to be more like medical? And we do not celebrate variation. Variation means recall. Massive recall, class action lawsuits, and of course loss of confidence in the case of doctors providing those products. But there is not yet a world guideline as to what those levels are, and we provided guidance on this. No perceived benefit has been no properly prescribed uncontrolled variability. The doctors get to the point that they simply won't provide the product, or more importantly for our business in our sector, the very large international companies that we work with say we cannot rely on the supply globally to actually infuse it into our product. So they of course have their own guidelines and their own Six Sigma for quality control that they have to manage. Now, what does that mean with regards to how we move forward? We've divided this into three primary columns that we work with government. First, we have administrative failures, we have operational failures, and then we have the audit failure. And this is obviously a non-complete list, but the biggest issues that we have, and these are the top of the waves, is rarely, if ever, does a government understand how many applications it's going to get once it opens the door. I've worked with governments where they thought they'd get 30. Try 1,100. Trying to get the policy into a review process that works is completely impossible. They have promised a 90-day review period. Try 2.5 years. With regards to qualified staff credentials, I've often worked with departments where the people that are in the department are there because they didn't fit in any other government department. Do they come from ag? No. Industry? No. Quality assurance? No. Record keeping? Heck no. Where are they from? Well, perhaps political science and philosophy. First degree was in philosophy, so I'm not giving them a hard time. But that doesn't qualify you for doing an application for a company that's going to make $100 million worth of business a year. Internal review errors and accountability. We find that departments do make a lot of mistakes, but rarely is that open for review to make corrective actions. And then, of course, we have registry of qualified consultants. One thing that government can benefit is being able to get a list of who they can talk to that may be representing 100 or so clients that are making applications. So rather than having to make 200 calls a week, they can make one. They could have the representative come and meet in the governmental office and go file by file. We used to do this with Health Canada, for example, green, red, yellow. If we had a file that's in trouble, we'd work to help the government fix it. If it was in red, then we'd decide whether to abandon the application or rescue it and move on from there. Operational rarely, if ever, comes up with cycle times that are adequate, and you can see the other list that we have here. And certainly on the audit side, at the end of the day, none of this matters if you can't show that the people who are actually making the product are following the rules. And we're seeing that across the globe. They are always looking for a way to squeak through, partly because they may be chasing the bottom dollar for their product, or they have a heavy contamination problem and they don't know what to do with it. So we've worked even with projects where they have heavily contaminated crops with mold. What they'll do is get a few that don't, and they'll take the approach of the solution to pollution's dilution, and we'll add bad product to good product at an amount that will squeak us under the requirement level. Is that being checked for audit? Absolutely not. All right, so what I would like to do now is pass this over to Mimi. I've just hit the tops of the waves of what's not working internationally. What I'd like to talk to you about, and Mimi is going to carry from here, is how do we go forward to get it right the first time? And how do we learn from those other lessons? And how can it be adopted quickly? So for example, in Panama, being able to have a framework that could be adopted by the federal election in May is possible. And being able to start an industry within 90 days of that is possible. And being able to move forward, and you're shaking your head, I say possible, not reality, but it is possible. And other jurisdictions we've worked with are beginning to embrace and adopt that so they can get into this very exciting market. And if Panama was to miss it, then of course the talk this afternoon will talk how many dollars they're going to lose as a consequence. Mimi.
Okay. Hi there. So Chris has talked about the previous incantations of regulatory systems, and the firstborn regulations of every country have honestly been failures. So Canada, where I live, has now implemented a third, maybe fourth version, which is among the most progressive in the world, and yet still lacks a lot in logical sequence and understandable, clear requirements. So the pillars of a regulatory framework have to prevent diversion, they have to manage product quality, it has to manage access, and it has to provide verification. So what does that mean? Preventing diversion is a key element because the government needs all the people to benefit from this, and that means that the criminal element needs to be removed, that if they're going to make regulations, then the regulations have to be followed. So we want to prevent the underage use and eliminate the black and gray market. Now, when we say gray market, that can be cannabis coming in the back door and going out as white label product. It could also be product going out the back door, which most governments are pretty good at preventing. Managing access is really part of the licensing process. So it really does no good to legalize medical cannabis, for example, if only 5% of the patients who are using it are actually getting a prescription, as was the case last year in Australia. So all you're doing then is creating that black market to flourish, and there has to be an access system in place for the not only the distribution of the product pharmaceutically, but also for the patients to get a prescription from a doctor and also to have the production in place. The production is based on the licensing process. So I'm going to go on with the product quality. We have to not harm the patient. That really needs to be the first step, is that we will make sure that the product is free of contamination from biologicals, chemicals, and of course physical contamination. I come from a background in food safety where millions of dollars of recalls are done almost on a daily basis, and lawsuits are rampant and companies fail due to these recalls. So we need to pay attention to this for the patient benefit, but also for the benefit of the company. And the verification of this through the government is going to mean that the compliance can be proven and that this way the country can align with international conventions and enable the economic benefit to the country. Okay, go forward. Oh,
You're on it.
okay. So we need to be proactive and we need to be prepared. So clear regulations are very important. A lot of governments really like to write regulations that are hard to interpret, and then they spend all their time writing interpretations which may change. So they create a moving target for the licensee. And I've seen this throughout my career with regulatory, that every year there's new guidance, that the regulation didn't change, but the guidance changed. So that should not be the case. If you write it so that it's understandable the first time, everyone will try to comply. Also, they must train the staff, the government staff. As Chris said, the staff has to have some kind of background to evaluate the applications, and they have to have the training to evaluate them consistently the same way. So if they use forms for this process, they can make it repeatable. Also, they can score applications for merit. If an application comes in and the first review shows that it's very deficient, it should be kicked back and they should go on to applications that have merit. So adequate legal supply will thwart the black market, and they will avoid the lack of investment that comes from taking a 90-day licensing process and stretching it out to a year or even more. Canada just effectively culled 400 applications due to the fact that they had not processed them effectively in the first place, and that those applications did not have the ability to move forward because they didn't have the knowledge and system in place to do so. And that was the fault of the government as well as the applicants. So we want to understand the demand and prepare to meet it. When I met with regulatory body in Australia, they said, well, we thought we'd get 20 applications and we got 200 the first month. We didn't know what to do. So we need to build on that knowledge that there's going to be more applications than one might think, and they're going to put that system in place. Also, I think that personal cultivation has to be written into the rules because most courts are going to recognize this as a human right and rule that way. And we have to track the production out of the facility against the money coming in to assure that we're balancing in that regard. So those are the pillars as we see them. The verification, very important. Auditing should be done by a set checklist that's available to applicants so they know what the bar is, and it's standardized, and it's on a level playing field for everyone.
Great, thanks, Mayor. Okay, so the framework, you take a picture of it, we have actually written the legislation itself. It is designed to be multi-jurisdictional, it is designed to be international, and it is designed to be used by the local government to adapt and adopt the local legal nuances of their system. Whether it's code or whether it's civil law, it is designed to flex for this. But it's also designed to harmonize all the departments at play. As we heard in some of the talks at ICA yesterday, failure to include finance, failure to include the Custom Excise Office, failure to include other related industry sections of the government will result in failure. And so what we're bringing to the table is an out-of-the-box solution that they can pick up and adapt to their own. All right, Chiron's picture, which they're presenting, is on the right. Clearly we know that there's a market. We don't need to go over that again. But what we're looking at here is finding a way to establish what we call the globally accepted cannabis statute and regulations, something that will allow us to truly transact cannabis globally. Right now there's a lot of talk, and we have many friends from Colombia here that are looking to export to other countries, whether it's in Europe or whether it's in North America, but that itself is problematic. It's not easy. And with, as Mimi said, a moving target in North America, that is even more problematic. Adopt technologies that will enable track and tracing. We are in Panama. We have over 90 banks here. Anyone had good times opening accounts post-Panama Papers knows how difficult it is to meet all the KYC, know your client, and AML, anti-money laundering requirements. When we sit down with the compliance officers in Panama for multiple banks here, we demonstrate we have more information than any of their other clients. We know who we're dealing with. We have their passports, we have their birth certificates, we have 5-year work histories of them and their spouses. We understand where they holidayed for the last 5 years and was that a country that perhaps could have been high risk. We know the shareholders, we know the directors, and we know the officers who control these companies. So what's the problem? The problem always comes back to, but that's great. Are you still tracking every gram, and are you tracking every penny? And that, of course, is the technologies that we've built. With regards to adopting that, it is easy enough, provided that it is supported by the regulation, and if it's not, then industry will dictate that that technology has to be in play in order for that to work. On permitting vertically integrated indoors, there is that debate. Again, are we making wine where variation is cool, or are we making medicine where that's recall? And what I'm finding with most of our government sessions is that is a dimension that is never discussed internally. And if it is, it's too late by the time they roll out the legislation. It has to happen quickly. Control the root causes of variation. We gave a topic yesterday at ICA that's available for those who are interested, where we have measured the variability of cannabis production as best we can, but it is so far below industry standard that we're a regulatory body, honestly, to look at this keenly, will know that their ability to manage problems is not being managed well at all. And so being able to control the production, control the cultivation, the pack and label will be critical, but you have to show how it's done. And again, for those of you that are coming to our COE, or Center of Excellence here in Panama, can see how that integrates. Permit doctors and patients and LPs to determine their own future. We've been in countries where the College of Physicians, perhaps wanting to tread very lightly, crawl before you walk, walk before you run, will have a very limited list of ailments to prescribe. So what happens? People figure that out, and they know what to say to the doctor to be able to get a prescription for an ailment that really isn't the problem in the first place, which defeats the whole purpose. What you need to do, and Chiron and other companies are certainly very active in this, Lyft, as well as they presented yesterday at ICA, are educating government bodies and physicians on how to properly prescribe the product, so that that's a relationship that should be kept between the doctor and the patient. And then, of course, the producer being able to meet that demand. And then, of course, make sure it's well planned and we have adequate staff for all of this. So to sum it all up, and we're right on schedule, at the end of the day, this is our mantra. This is what we say in TheraCann all day. Is what we're developing at a governmental level, regulatory level, law enforcement level, producer, processor, distributor level, something that is repeatable. Growing in a field, and I come from an agricultural background, is fantastic. I love it. But can I guarantee that what I grew last season will be grown the same this season? That is a problem. Economic. If I'm going to adopt technology that grows indoors, is it something that I can get return on in 3 to 6 months, not 3 to 6 years from now? Yes. Is it practical? Is it something that's so difficult to do, I can't find enough trained people to actually do this at a large industrial scale? Is it safe, and is it secure? We are managing businesses that start at $100 million a year, 30,000 square feet, growing vertically on 3 levels. The amount of inventory that may be held at any given time can attract the wrong type. So being able to put in security systems for that obviously is interesting. If done in phases, this can be done very proper, but it has to be thought through. Now, last slide. Panama is our head office. We obviously have found this place without accident. Panama is the center of distribution. It is a logistics hub. Our office literally is a step between North and South America. We are using this as a center, as I say, to attract law enforcement, regulatory bodies, to come and see how it should look. This isn't a return to the old ways in the old days. This is how we industrialize what we need to do here. We have offices in Canada and Australia and beyond. But any of those who wish to find out more information on our technologies can go through the main site, which is theracan.solutions. And of course, we welcome you. This is an open dialogue. CannaTech is all about networking, of course. You have the brightest minds from around the world that come to CannaTech, and it's unique. It is a small community, but we have all walks of professional life here. It's unique in that sense. So again, I thank you for your time. We look forward to seeing you all in this very interesting vertical market, and I wish you well. Mucho gusto.